Welcome to this explainer. When we think about the Apollo missions, our minds almost automatically go straight to the grand triumphs, right? The massive roar of that Saturn V rocket, the iconic boot print left in the lunar dust, the whole giant leap for mankind. But today, we're going to look right past that grand triumph. We are going to uncover the bizarre, the hidden, and the incredibly human footnotes of the Apollo missions. Because as you'll see, these are the fascinating stories of what happens when human beings take their absolute most earthly traits and drag them right up into the cosmos. So let's kick things off with a question that completely flips the script on what you might expect from that massive scientific milestone back on July 20, 1969. If I were to ask you, what was the very first liquid ever poured on the moon? You'd probably guess something scientific, maybe rocket fuel, recycled drinking water, some sort of high-tech chemical from the lunar lander. But the actual answer is far more ancient and traditional than you could possibly imagine. And it happened just hours after the Eagle touched down on the Sea of Tranquility, right before Neil Armstrong even climbed down that ladder. Let's dive right into Secret 1, the secret communion, and the first meal on the moon. Okay, picture this. In the totally crammed cabin of the lunar module, Buzz Aldrin performed a very quiet, untelevised ritual. See, Aldrin was an elder at Webster Presbyterian Church down in Texas, a congregation that was actually so tied to the space program that people called it the Church of the Astronauts. So using this tiny home communion kit that his pastor put together for him, Aldrin unstowed a silver chalice, a wafer, and a little vial of wine. And the physical reality of doing this earthly ritual in a totally alien environment is just fascinating. Because of the moon's 1/6 gravity, the wine didn't just settle flat in the cup like it does here on Earth. Instead, as he poured it, the liquid gracefully curled and just slowly climbed up the inside curve of that silver chalice. He ate the wafer, drank the wine, and boom, that marked the very first meal eaten and the very first liquid poured anywhere off the Earth. Now, you are absolutely, totally justified in wondering, why have I never seen the footage of this? Well, Aldrin originally planned to share this really profound moment by broadcasting his reading of a passage from the Gospel of John over the radio. But prior to the flight, NASA management stepped in. They asked him to keep his radio message strictly non-denominational and to literally keep the communion itself off the air. So Aldrin radioed down this incredibly careful message instead, asking listeners to give thanks in their own way, and then he literally switched off the broadcast so he could read his scripture in private. The behind-the-scenes tension here is just wild. Why was NASA being so cautious? Well, just 6 months earlier, the crew of Apollo 8 had read from the book of Genesis on live television while they were orbiting the moon on Christmas Eve. And that broadcast prompted a fierce lawsuit from Madalyn Murray O'Hair, the founder of American Atheists. Her argument was that because the astronauts were government employees, doing that on the clock violated the constitutional separation of church and state. Now, even though her lawsuit was legally pretty weak and did eventually fizzle out, it was highly active in July of 1969. NASA was deeply rattled by the whole thing, and that's exactly why they instructed Aldrin to tone down his lunar communique. They just didn't want to inflame the situation any further. Moving right along, let's look at Secret 2, the space quarantine, and the fear of lunar contamination. So, we're shifting from a story of personal faith to a story of profound, almost sci-fi level paranoia. Back in 1969, nobody actually knew for sure what was on the moon. There was this very real, palpable fear that returning astronauts might accidentally unleash some deadly alien plague or harmful biological contamination right onto the Earth. To prepare for this totally terrifying unknown, the government actually enacted a literal space quarantine law. It was called the Extraterrestrial Exposure Law, officially added right into the Code of Federal Regulations. It gave NASA the absolute authority to guard the Earth by officially defining what it meant to be extraterrestrially exposed. Basically, any person, property, or even an animal that had touched a celestial body had to go into a strict 21-day quarantine. They were not taking any chances with moon germs. Because of this law, the triumphant homecomings for the Apollo 11, 12, and 14 crews looked a lot more like a hazmat operation than a victory parade. The astronauts couldn't just step out and hug their families. Oh no. After splashing down in the ocean, they were walked directly from their recovery helicopters right into a mobile quarantine facility sitting on the deck of an aircraft carrier. From there, the whole shebang was transported to a specially built facility at the Johnson Space Center called the Lunar Receiving Laboratory. And that is where the astronauts, along with all those precious lunar samples, were completely sealed away behind strict biological barriers, getting studied in vacuum chambers and glove boxes. Fortunately for everyone, the whole fear of an alien space plague was completely unfounded. So those incredibly strict protocols didn't last forever. After spending a ton of time carefully analyzing the astronauts and the lunar dirt from the Apollo 11, 12, and 14 flights, scientists definitively concluded there was zero hazard to humans, animals, or plants. NASA officially stopped enforcing the quarantine requirement in 1971, right before Apollo 15 launched. That extraterrestrial exposure law just kind of sat on the books doing nothing for a few more years until it was formally revoked for good in 1977. Which brings us to our final section, Secret 3, the Great Moon Rock Heist. Now, you would really think that after traveling hundreds of thousands of miles into the absolute void of space just to collect physical pieces of the moon, we would guard them perfectly, right? Well, human nature, as it always does, complicates things with a chaotic black market aftermath. Over the course of the 6 Apollo missions that actually landed on the moon between 1969 and 1972, astronauts returned an astonishing 382 kilograms of lunar material. To put that in perspective, that's over 840 pounds of rocks, core samples, sand, and dust brought back to Earth. Obviously, this material is incredibly rare, which makes it highly valuable to scientists and, unfortunately, highly lucrative to thieves. The story gets super complicated because of what started as a really nice diplomatic decision. Following the historic first landing of Apollo 11, and then later the final landing of Apollo 17, the Nixon administration decided they wanted to share this huge triumph of the United States with the rest of the world. So they created the Goodwill Moonrock Gifts. They ended up distributing 270 of these invaluable, carefully encased lunar samples to all 50 U.S. states and to various nations all around the globe. On paper, it was a genuinely beautiful gesture of international unity. But oh man, things went off the rails so fast. Today, the whereabouts of over half of those 270 gifts literally cannot be confirmed. Shockingly, around 180 of these absolutely priceless rocks just vanished. The samples that were given to Brazil, Canada, and Sweden simply went missing. The rocks belonging to Malta and Romania actively stolen and sold on the black market. But perhaps the most tragic and honestly bizarre fate of all belongs to Ireland's moon rock. Get this, it was accidentally thrown in the garbage after someone mistook it for ordinary debris following a fire at the observatory where it was housed. You cannot make this up. This massive loss and the sudden emergence of an entire counterfeit moon rock market finally sparked some action. NASA launched a full-blown undercover sting operation called Operation Lunar Eclipse. But the investigation didn't even stop there. A senior special agent named Joseph Gutines, after he left NASA to teach at the University of Phoenix, actually challenged his criminal justice graduate students to go out and locate the missing Goodwill moon rocks. It's like a movie plot. Together, through years of intense sleuthing, Gutines and his university students have successfully hunted down 78 of the missing samples, rescuing them straight from the black market. So as we wrap up this explainer, we are left to ponder a rather profound thought. We usually look back at Apollo as this almost mythological triumph of pure science and engineering. But doesn't it perfectly reflect our humanity that the very moment we stepped foot on another world, we immediately brought our earthly faith, our terrestrial fears, our complex laws, and even our penchant for theft right along with us to the stars? It's a striking reminder that no matter how far into the cosmos humanity eventually travels, we will always, unmistakably, bring ourselves. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope this leaves you wanting to uncover even more of the hidden human histories behind our greatest achievements.